right, welcome everyone to our penultimate session on agricultural knowledge. We had some technical difficulties, but it appears we have our Zoom people all with us, and we have our speakers, and we have our audience really together. All right, so our first speaker today is going to be Kathryn from the University of St. Andrews on the dreaded American Fireblight, Aotearoa New Zealand orchard instructors and the communication of scientific knowledge in the 1920s.
Thank you very much. Hello, I'm Kathryn Bruce. I'm a final year PhD candidate at University of St. Andrews in Scotland. And I just want to start off by saying a huge thank you to the conference organisers and the student volunteers. It's been a really amazing few days. It's been fascinating. And it's been a real privilege to be here and participate in what has been a wonderful event. So without further ado, the dreaded American Fireblight. In March 1920, New Zealand biologist Alfred Cockayne alerted the readers of the New Zealand Journal of Agriculture to the presence of the dreaded American fireblight in the North Island of New Zealand. Confirming the alarming reports that had been circulating in the Dominion's newspapers since that December, he wrote that officers of the Horticulture Division and Biology Section had made a complete investigation into this outbreak, and the disease has been fully proved to be the dreaded American fireblight. Cockayne explained how in North America, fireblight has caused probably more loss than any other single fruit tree disease. Unless adequately controlled in the Dominion, it is liable to prove disastrous to our fruit-growing interests. In the rest of the article, Cockayne relayed details of the life cycle of the fireblight in apple and pear orchards and how New Zealand fruit growers could detect and remove infection in their trees. In addition to the really quite dramatic stakes that Cockayne outlines in this passage, what really jumps out to me is the mention of officers of the Horticultural Division and their role alongside the biology section in investigating fireblight. And it's these officers, namely orchard instructors, that are going to be the subject of my paper today. But first, I think it's quite helpful just to break down what fireblight actually is. So fireblight is a global crop disease. It's indigenous to North America, and it's caused by the bacterium Owinia amylivora. It mainly affects fruit-producing members of the Rosaceae family, so apples, pears, and quinces, for example. And it's quite likely that the first occurrence of this disease was on plants native to North America, also within that same family. So something like crabapple or mountain ash, which then spread to the apple and pear orchards that were introduced into that environment by European settlers. Visually, fireblight is a very dramatic crop disease, and I think the two images on this slide exemplify that quite well. It causes the leaves and the branches of the trees to have this kind of wilted and fire-fanged appearance, and the wood of the tree is actually stained internally, what's been described as a foxy reddish-brown colour, which deepens to black as the disease progresses. Usually, the harvest for the next 2 years is lost, and in extreme cases, the infection can kill the limb or even the whole tree. Fireblight was first referred to in print in 1793, but it wasn't until 1880 that the American agricultural scientist Thomas Burrell discovered its causal organism. And Burrell's discovery was really quite significant because it meant that fireblight was the first plant disease to be identified as being caused by a bacterium. So not only was this discovery a shift in the knowledge surrounding fireblight, but it was also a shift in the understanding of plants, their pathogens, and the capabilities of bacteria. My PhD thesis utilizes fireblight as a cultural tracer to explore the various communities involved in the creation and communication of horticultural knowledge in the Anglo world between 1880 and 1939. And I'm specifically looking at Canada, New Zealand, and the United States, because in this time period, the disease was only confirmed to be in those three places. By investigating how various communities of scientists, orchardists, and civil servants developed their understandings of how to deal with this culturally and biologically distinctive crop disease, my thesis explores how each community developed a consensus, but also how knowledge moved between those communities. And the orchard instructors that I'm discussing today are one such example of a community with expert knowledge examined in my thesis. So who are orchard instructors? What kind of people were they? There's relatively little secondary literature about orchard instructors. In histories of the Department of Agriculture or fruit growing in particular regions of New Zealand, they tend to be briefly mentioned, and most attention is paid to the first two instructors appointed in the 1890s. But today I will be arguing that orchard instructors had to draw on a variety of types of horticultural knowledge, some derived from practical experience, some from scientific research, to fulfill their roles as a go-between for communities of scientists and commercial fruit growers. And while it's certainly the case that historians of science have long debated and recognized the rigid dichotomization of science when we use idealized categories such as pure or practical, these were in fact categories that these orchard instructors and the Department of Agriculture at this time explicitly used when defining their roles. And they used these categories and the potential crisis of fireblight to their advantage. So digging into primary literature then, there are some features of the instructors that I've been able to identify. Firstly, orchard instructors were government employees. They worked for the Department of Agriculture. And the organisation of the department, after being reshuffled in the early 1920s, was one consisting of several different branches of livestock, dairy, fields, and horticulture, each having their own groups of inspectors and instructors. Orchard instructors operated within the horticulture division, answering firstly to the Director of Horticulture and then to the Director General of the Department and the Minister for Agriculture. All Department of Agriculture employees, including orchard instructors, were employed through the Public Service Commission, which was founded in 1912 by the Public Service Act, which aimed to create a non-political civil service under the direction of the Public Service Commissioner and 2 assistant commissioners. And this is actually really great for my research because all matters that related to the commission were published in the New Zealand Gazette, which was kind of the government's weekly newsletter. And this includes appointments, job advertisements, new legislation, and lists of all employees in New Zealand working for the Public Service Commission. And the cover of one of those issues is the image on the left of this slide. So from those documents, we can see that, like the Department of Agriculture, the commission was divided into divisions: administrative, professional, clerical, and general. And in the case of Department of Agriculture employees, members of the biology and chemistry sections were employed under the professional division, whereas instructors were within the general division. And within this is a deliberate and distinct separation between departmental instructors and departmental scientists, the latter requiring a university degree. Within the general division, there were several pay grades with a corresponding hierarchy of orchard instructors. And so in larger commercial fruit growing districts like Auckland, there could be multiple instructors operating under a senior orchard instructor. So if the biologists and the chemists in the professional division needed a degree, my next question was, what kind of qualifications would an orchard instructor need? Well, the Public Service Act in 1912 stipulated certain education levels for all employees. Those who hoped to work for the commission, regardless of the division they went into, didn't have a university degree, were expected to sit the civil service junior entrance examination. And the stipulations for that examination are in this image on the slide. Both the English, they were required to sit papers from 3 groups, and both the English and arithmetic papers in group 1 were mandatory. And then they had to take an exam from either group 2 or 3. And papers in group 2 included, among other things, elementary physical science, practical agriculture, dairy science, botany, or zoology. And officers in the general divisions, such as the orchard instructors, were therefore expected to have a certain level of education according to these very specific criteria set by the commission. But this practice doesn't seem to continue into the 1920s. The Gazette's annual lists of all employees under the Public Service Commission very helpfully note any examinations sat or qualifications held by each and every single employee. As you can hopefully see on the image on this slide, this is the entire horticulture division in 1925. And some orchard instructors, such as number 22 on the list, William Kerr Dallas, who began his career in the department's cadet service in 1908, did take the junior entrance exam, and that's listed as JNEX in the far right column. However, the majority of instructors that are listed throughout the 1920s don't have this exam or any other qualification listed in the notes and qualifications column. So my next avenue of investigation was to see if there were any stipulations in the job advertisements. And in the sample years of the Gazette that I've looked at, I haven't been able to find anything specific for orchard instructors. but I have, however, found some for other Department of Agriculture instructors, including a dairy instructor who would obviously have worked for the dairy division, and a vine and wine instructor who would have worked like the orchard instructors in the horticulture division. In addition to a statement of education and experience and the ability to be able to write well, be quick and accurate in figures, and be able to draft reports in a satisfactory manner, what's clear is the importance of practical experience in the commercial dairying or viticulture industries. Dairy instructors had to demonstrate thorough competence in managing dairy factories through having had several years' experience as successful cheese factory managers. Likewise, the department required applicants for the vine and wine instructor role to have a good knowledge of the growth of vines in the vineyard and glasshouse, thorough knowledge of the various pests and diseases which posed a threat to New Zealand viticulture and how to treat them, in addition to knowledge of how to make wine. So if we extrapolate these requirements for fruit growing, it's likely that similar stipulations would have been given to orchard instructors, such as managing a commercial fruit nursery or orchard, and to have knowledge and experience of dealing with orchard pests and diseases. So I then tried to look at the backgrounds of individuals who were orchard instructors, and from the ones that I could trace, this idea of expertise from practical experience rings true. As I've already mentioned, William Kerr Dallas gained his experience through his training at the department, beginning as a cadet in 1908, and this was like an apprenticeship scheme, and he studied fruit culture and viticulture. He was later promoted to orchard instructor, then assistant director of horticulture, and then in 1938 he was made director of the horticulture division. Others, such as John W. Collard or Leonard Painter, had family-owned commercial orchards, and they had been in charge of managing those prior to their appointments as instructors. And Collard's interest in horticulture is evident. He was elected to the British Royal Horticultural Society as a fellow resident abroad in 1911, 3 years after his move to New Zealand from Britain. So we can hazard an educated guess as to what kind of experience they had, but what did their role involve? According to the Department of Agriculture's annual report for 1920 to 21, orchard instructors were expected to keep abreast of the latest scientific knowledge concerning their specialism and communicate the practical applications of this to growers in their district, combining sound practical knowledge with a good knowledge of scientific agriculture. And they communicated this advice through lectures, demonstrations at Department of Agriculture experimental farms, at fruit growers' own orchards, through correspondence, and by writing seasonal advice, which was published each month in the New Zealand Journal of Agriculture. The Journal of Agriculture was the department's own publication, and beginning in 1910, the New Zealand Journal of Agriculture cemented this dichotomy between scientific research and practical advice. In the first half of each issue, research conducted by the Department of Agriculture's scientists was published, aimed at an audience of other scientists. And in the second half, practical advice written by the department's instructors was given for New Zealand's farmers and fruit growers. And the images on this slide show a combination of the monthly advice by orchard instructors and the more in-depth research published by the department's biologists, and they're both concerned with Fireblight. But the orchard instructors didn't just communicate horticultural knowledge, they were also involved in creating it. The vast majority of experimentation conducted by the department outside of the laboratory and in the orchard was conducted under the direction of the orchard instructors, who would report their conclusions to the department and in the Journal of Agriculture. And it was these practical experiments which were used to determine the department's advice for the best practice of disease control. And this is outlined in the preface to Fungus Diseases of Fruit Trees in New Zealand, which is a book written by the Department of Agriculture's mycologist, Gordon Cunningham, who wrote that wherever spray treatments are given, these have been based upon actual experiments carried out in the orchards by the orchard instructors of the horticulture division. Hence, in this publication, no information regarding spray treatment is given unless the treatment has been put successfully into operation. So what does all this mean in the context of Fireblight? Well, in my thesis, I argue that Fireblight arrived at a time when the network of orchard instructors throughout the Dominion and their claim to be expert authority on the practical matters of horticulture was coming to fruition. The crisis, or the threat of crisis, presented in literature like Cocaine's article about Fireblight, presented an opportunity for the department and the orchard instructors to further monopolize a position of expertise. Unlike fruit growers in North America who'd grown up with Fireblight, and had been able to recognize the disease and experiment with different treatments or preventatives, fruit growers in New Zealand had never encountered it before. They couldn't recognize it. Furthermore, their industry was much newer and it was much more precarious than that in North America. From the very first reports of fireblight in New Zealand, fruit growers were instructed to contact their district's orchard instructor if they saw anything suspicious on the trees. In the same March 1920 issue of the Journal of Agriculture, as Cocaine's announcement, J.A. Campbell, the Assistant Director of Horticulture, described the symptoms of fireblight and instructed that every grower who has trees showing the conditions resembling the foregoing description is asked to notify the Director of the Horticulture Division, Wellington, or the orchard instructor for the district. At the same time, he's urged not to wait for official identification of the disease, but to remove and destroy all dead wood. Specimens, carefully wrapped, should then be forwarded for identification to the local orchard instructor. And this was the approach to fireblight throughout the entirety of the 1920s into the 1930s. And this was supported by legislation which gave orchard instructors and other officers of the division increased levels of authority to control and prevent the spread of fireblight. This fits with the department's attitude towards all orchard pests and diseases. A series of legislation in the early 20th century had set the pattern for orchard instructors to visit each commercial orchard and check for prohibited pests, diseases, and weeds. The initial approach was to add fireblight to the list of diseases, and hawthorn, a plant which was common in New Zealand, and a host to fireblight to the list of noxious weeds. In 1922, further steps were taken with the passing of the Fireblight Act, which gave the power to assign areas as commercial fruit growing districts and gave orchard instructors increased power to control the disease in those areas. Fireblight committees made up of experienced fruit growers were assembled in those districts, and they were responsible for looking for signs of the disease and doing their best to eradicate it and prevent further spread. But even in this, the orchard instructors were able to reinforce their own authority, and they acted as the heads of those committees, and they instructed the work that needed doing. In 1923, a Department of Agriculture scientist, Richard Waters, developed the first diagnostic laboratory test for fireblight, and this further helped the department and the instructors reaffirm authority in controlling the disease. So in addition to acting as go-betweens for the communication of fruit growing and fireblight knowledge, orchard instructors acted as go-betweens for those tests. They would take the sample from the orchard, send it to the laboratory, and receive the results. And from there, they would inform the Fireblight Committee of what they needed to do. Instructions for cutting out parts of trees infected by fireblight and the exact formulations for the required disinfectants were provided frequently throughout the 1920s. And within this, we can see evidence of the Department of Agriculture utilizing existing North American scientific literature when formulating advice. J.A. Campbell in March 1920 was able to very specifically advise orchardists on hygienic best practice after having removed plant material infected with suspected fireblight, and this echoed the recommendations in American Agricultural College bulletins. This is one such example here. They had to use a 5% solution of formalin, Lysol, or some other germicide, and after sterilizing, paint the wound over with coal tar. Fireblight prevention was also a topic of advice, and the threat of hawthorn acting as a host plant, allowing the disease to spread between orchards and to survive over winter, as outlined in these American papers, caused a good deal of concern. Officers of the New Zealand Department of Agriculture had cable communication with the USDA, and the Americans were non-committal, replying only that hawthorn was liable to infection, and the conversation, quote, drew from the American authorities no definite information on this point. The choice of cable communication as opposed to any other form of correspondence really demonstrates the sense of urgency felt by the New Zealand Department of Agriculture. The scientists in New Zealand investigated the issue themselves, and in response to the discovery again by Richard Waters that it was possible for the pathogen to overwinter in hawthorn hedges in New Zealand, growers were advised to keep watch. And the department also tried to discourage any further planting of hawthorn. And instructor W.H. Taylor wrote an article advising New Zealand farmers on alternative hedges they could use. He acknowledged that the hawthorn hedges had been extensively planted, but reminded growers that whatever may be the fate of the existing hedges, no more will be planted, this being now prohibited under the Noxious Weeds Act. As legislation like the Noxious Weeds Act and the Fireblight Act came into effect throughout the 1920s, the advice concerning hawthorn became more specific and more consistent. In districts where hawthorn had been declared a noxious weed or later notified as a commercial fruit growing area, instructors advised that fruit growers, more especially in those commercial areas, who have still hawthorn growing on those properties, are again advised to deal with this plant by grubbing it out by the roots and destroying the refuse by burning. And they made the point of saying this isn't just because of legislation, but because it's the best thing to do. So within all the examples that I've shown you, what is central is the emphasis on the practical implications of scientific knowledge about fireblight, be it the best practice for removal of infected plant material, prevention of the spread of fireblight by removing host plants such as hawthorn. Moreover, fireblight was consistently portrayed as an impending crisis for the fruit-growing industry of New Zealand, and the Department of Agriculture and its local representation in the form of orchard instructors were portrayed as the expert authorities who could prevent that from happening. So to conclude, I've set out today to show you an example of a community who had expert knowledge, and orchard instructors needed to make use of different types of knowledge about fruit growing from a variety of sources in order to fulfill their role as acting as a go-between for the scientists of the Department of Agriculture and the Dominion's commercial fruit growers. The arrival of fireblight in New Zealand presented an opportunity for these instructors and the Department of Agriculture more generally to position themselves as the expert authority on the subject, creating somewhat of a monopoly of expertise and control over the response to fireblight outbreaks, aided by a goal of eradicating the disease from the Dominion, but they were never actually successful in doing so. And within these examples, I've hoped to suggest some new avenues for research for understanding the creation and communication of scientific knowledge about horticulture. These orchard instructors were absolutely instrumental in the networks of scientific communication in New Zealand at this time, and we can learn a good deal more about those networks when we include them in our investigation. Thank you.
Kathryn, lovely. We have questions from the floor.
Make sure you talk to Janmar, because he wants to put together a project on crisis in the history of science, so this would be a great example, I think. There's been a lot written about expertise in go-between, but very little on instructions, like really following in how instructions are constructed and then read, right? We often think that it's a one-way street or something like that. The interpretations on the ground really matter. That's hard to ascertain.
Yeah.
But it's still ascertainable, I think. And I think it might be a nice direction in the history of science to look at just how instructions are written and how they are embodying certain kinds of authority, but also how those authorities reinterpreted vernacularly at the tip. I bet you there's tons in this that follow that around. It'd be fascinating. What's a boost?
Thank you.
Oh, for it.
Another question in the back.
Excuse me, you said at the beginning that you also included Canada as part of your purview. I would suggest to you a paper that I've written on Canada, dealing with the period before your study, but mostly on the communication from the Dominion entomologists, Dominion agriculturalists. We were sending out thousands and thousands of letters to people all across the country to communicate information. I'll send that out.
That would be great. Thank you so much.
Is there one last question?
Everybody wants to have a part of your thesis. Get in there.
And we can't see anyone on Zoom. If anyone on Zoom has a question.
It's here, actually. We
I'm
have
on Switchboard and check now.
Any others? All right, in the interest of time, let's thank Kathryn again. All right, so next up we have Hairong Huang from the University of Toronto. We're in her 5th year working on this project, and the paper today we'll have up in a moment, Seeing Knowledge Circulation Through Pig Networks, Circulatory Technology and Material Culture of Pigs in Laos, China.
Here.
Yeah. Oh.
It's on,
Excellent.
excellent, thanks,
Excellent.
Kate.
Thank you, please.
And good afternoon. It's my great honor to present my research Pixar products today.
We have to press it first and then do the arrow. The click
Okay,
and then do the
There you
arrow.
go.
Down here.
today pigs are segregated from humans and many presented to us as meat. But in North China, providing meat was only a secondary concern. Instead, the main reason for the socialist regime to call on mass campaigns for raising pigs was for manure. I would discuss fertilizer and meat elsewhere. So in this presentation, I will focus on pig fat products. Three pig fat products: blood, bristles, and skins. The Mao era saw a sea change for pigs in China. The shift was best encapsulated in Chairman Mao Zedong's 1959 letter about pigs. While pigs were inferior to horses, cattle, sheep, chicken, and dogs in pre-modern China, these humble animals were given a privileged status on top of other livestock in the Mao era. Why? Because every pig is a small organic fertilizer factory, and the pig has meat, bristles, skins, bones, and viscera. It's also interesting that Mao cited the US agriculture system as a reference for developing Chinese agriculture.
Excuse me, can you speak louder, please?
Oh,
I'm sorry.
can you hear me okay?
Now you can. It's okay.
It's interesting that Mao cited the US agriculture system as a reference for developing a Chinese animal husbandry. Despite the covert tensions between socialist and capitalist camps, China developed the pig industry by taking insights from various countries across the Iron Curtain. In the 1960s, the head of the Chinese Academy of Science, Huang purposed a collection of stamps propagating state policies about pigs. Huang wrote, "Pigs are full of treasures. A ton of card can exchange for 5 tons of steel, the pig body in the steel factory. 12 boxes of bristles can be exchanged for a tractor. The pig body is a machinery factory," and so on. In the spirit of Chairman Mao, was prefaced efficient pigs as resource factories to help China earn foreign exchange. The multiple uses of pig products was under the umbrella of comprehensive utilization, a concept already in use at least in the early 1950s. Mostly for developing rivers for multiple uses, like for hydraulic power, waterways, fishing, and so on. And during the Great Forward, the concept was refashioned and recast into an economical approach to help China transition to socialism by recycling waste into resources. And pigs were often described as a treasure box. For example, a 1959 news introduced how a Tianjin food factory took out hundreds of treasures out from pig bodies and turned its slaughterhouse into joint enterprise of meat processor, pharmaceutical factory, and power plant. What exactly were those treasures? First, manure is excellent fertilizer, meat is food, and bristles help make brushes and MSGs. And pig skins can be leathers and even surgically transplanted onto patients whose skin were burned. And we have pig brains, livers, and other organs, which can be served as medical ingredients. Let's get started with the legal case about pig blood. In October 1992, over 50 cases of mass violence erupted in Sichuan County, resulting in 7 deaths and over 120 injuries. And 1 month later, 6 people were beaten to death in a Gansu village. More importantly, those homicides was group crimes committed by almost the whole village. Everybody know that. And in early 1992, rumors circulated about how those police dealers injected toxic ingredients into pigs to get pig blood to make some precious medicine 20 times more precious than gold. And anyone who eat those pigs would shortly die without any signs.
As rumors circulated to Gansu, the unknown pig blight dealers were criticized as foreign trained technicians, and to dispel public panic, television broadcasted some videos of local officials buying pork from the market and eating the meat, and health departments published some articles to rebut the existence of toxic ingredients able to accelerate the exclusion of pig blight. And however, peasants were so outraged at those unknown dealers from the foreign, so some tourists, businessmen, and other outsiders became a suspicious target and at worst beaten to death. After the homicides, legal reporters criticized the barbarism of peasants and called for science intelligence, and scholars like Zhu Xiaoyang started tensions between the state's legal system and rural justice. However, this narrative doesn't explain why the propaganda of local governments and educational health departments failed to dispel public panic. After reviewing pharmaceutical and veterinary magazines from the 1950s to 90s, it's clear that extracting pig blight for medical use was not just an anti-scientific rumor believed by barbaric peasants, but a historical practice of technological experimentation starting from the Maoist past. The relevancy of rumors about foreign trained technicians, pig blight dealers, and toxic pork was better understood as the unsettling alienation of mass participation in those experiments, along with China, the opening of China, and professionalization of science in the post-modern era. Experiments on medical use of pig blight started with passion for extracting bilirubin, which is a key ingredient for synthesizing artificial bisol. Bisol is a mass in bovine stomach, used as a precious raw material in Chinese medicine. And the high value of such kind of animal products result in rampant smuggling and other underground activities. And in 1955, a Tianjin experiment team synthesized artificial bisol with a cattle blood. But because cattle was expensive and short in supply, experimenters like Tang Dexian and Zhang Nenrong turned to pig blight well into the 1960s. And in 1971, the National Conference finalized artificial bisol's formula, mainly using pig blight for bilirubin extraction. And this history of artificial bisol was not an autonomous history of the development of a Chinese pharmaceutical development, but draw on various foreign research. In particular, German chemist George Statel's extraction of bilirubin from bovine gallstones. And in the 1960s to 70s, pharmacists and workers continued to improve the formulas for artificial bisol with chemical research in America and Japan to clarify the composition of bisol and the working of the computer. And moreover, the experiments and production of artificial bisol was supported by various groups of people beyond the pharmacists, coordinated by local authorities, butchers at slaughterhouses, staff at livestock stations, and even cooks at communal kitchen all collected animal organs for pharmaceutical production. And according to historian Liz Chi's survey, places like Shanghai and Sichuan together sent about 40,000 kilograms of blight calcium to Tianjin in 1958. It's too romantic to take this kind of wide participation of different sectors as the Maoist regime's true respect for the people, because the state called for mass contribution to pharmaceutical innovations brought at a time when the regime sought to make up for resource deficiency with human efforts. Nevertheless, this attempt to get the masses involved helped keep them informed of recent changes. The active mobilization of mass involvement warmed in the 1980s and 90s. Researchers devised new methods for extracting pig blight, trying to surgically cut through pig skins and insert a tube into pig bowl. And by the early 1990s, researchers had found that pigs suffered damaged digestive systems, and some pregnant pigs would give birth to very weak piglets. And many of these new methods and findings were conducted at village pig farms, but soon patented as private intellectual property of veterinarians, pharmacists, and private companies. And the growing privatization and professionalization of pharmaceutical production, this kind of alienated the common folk from new technologies. And due to this alienation, it's understandable, though not forgivable, why peasants so easily freak out as rumors circulated about unknown technicians from foreign and sick pig in 1992. And bristles. Bristles were an important export commodity of China. According to 1930s and 40s custom report, pork bristles normally ranked among the top 10 of Chinese agriculture exports, and Chinese bristles took up around 70% of local bristle market. Despite a downsizing bristle market under the challenge of synthetic fibers and the loss of the US market after the CCP came to power, Chinese bristle was still popular in the second half of the 20th century. Cheng Yuanyu, a cadre at East China Foreign Trade Bureau in 1950s Shanghai, argued that Chinese bristles could beat bristles from other countries because more primitive breeds produce better bristles. Poland and Russia were more progressive, and so their breeding efforts focused on meat production. Because their pigs eat well and live well, pigs gradually lost bristles, but in contrast, Chinese peasants could only afford to let pigs eat on forage and sleep in toilets. So Chinese pigs had to grow tough and long bristles for self-protection. And zoo technicians Cai Wuji and Mei Shudong similarly argue that advanced countries use chemical fertilizers so they improve pig breeds, mainly to get meat in a shorter time. And bristles from their pigs were short and soft. Chinese pigs offer meat as food, manure as fertilizer, and bristles as byproducts. Before China industrialized its agriculture, the production of pig bristles wouldn't be affected, but Chinese bristles would eventually degenerate as Chinese science progressed. This argument reflected the idea of meat-based evolution proposed by French naturalist Lamarck and developed by Soviet biologist Mishkin and Lysenko that was popular in China during the 1950s. But Chinese pig breed doesn't necessarily produce more bristles as those zoo technicians assume. According to a Shanghai meat processing factory's comparison of 5 different pigs, the bristle production of white-haired pigs, which were mostly some improved breeds mixed with foreign pigs, ranked third, not last among the 5. However, some Chinese local pigs were indeed famous for their bristles. Short bristles from North China could be exported only when they were sold together with some hard bristles from Sichuan, which is in the south, and for zoo technicians from Huang to improve the quality of pork bristles. Breeding efforts should be focused on Sichuan pigs because crossbreeding with foreign pigs like the Yorkshire will accelerate the growth of pigs but generate bristles. And in the early 1950s, the Agriculture Department of East Sichuan told local governments not to promote Yorkshire pigs because those kind of pigs don't have bristles and will harm national trade. Instead, just strengthen the promotion of Rongchang pig and other pig breed in Sichuan. But despite concern about bristle qualities, in the 1950s and 60s, most breeding efforts focused on making pigs larger and fatter through bizarre experiments to crossbreed pigs with bovines in the hope of making pigs as large as cattle and even elephants. In the 1960s, breeding was not the major approach for the socialist regime to increase bristle production. Instead, local governments focused on mobilizing workers and peasants into efforts to take bristles from live pigs in the spirit of preventing waste. Normally, pork bristles were taken during the slaughter process, yet in the countryside, some peasants collected bristles from live pigs without killing them. Every spring and summer, bristles naturally come off pig bodies as the weather gets warmer. So some peasants took advantage of this natural molting of pigs and seeing great potential in increasing bristle production in this rural practice. The commercial departments in Sichuan and elsewhere promoted across the province through mass campaigns in 1963. And according to Chinese Agricultural Products Import and Export Company, the advantage of brushing bristles from live pigs lies in not only collecting bristles, but helping pigs reduce injuries, prevent diseases, enhance health, and grow better. And in Sichuan, technical guides for collecting bristles from live pigs were posted across the province. The perfect choice for performing this bristle collecting method was pig keepers, because pigs can easily freak out as strangers touch them. But the Bureau of Foreign Trade also asked peasants and cooks to brush bristles, mobilized some small traders to purchase bristles from some remote villages, and send some propaganda teams to the countryside to teach them how bristle collecting techniques. If mobilizing mass efforts in collecting bristles helped increase bristle production, some forces were threatening the production. In 1964, Chengdu Animal Products Company cracked 3 cases of stolen bristles amounting to over 100 kilograms. According to local police, these thieves were caught for some common features. First, the number of bristles they tried to sell was too large. Second, they could hardly explain where they got the bristles. Third, the bristles all look the same and should be factory products. And in 1971, the Tianjin Animal Products Company stored about 7,000 boxes of hog bristles at a warehouse. But when those boxes were packed before being shipped to the Soviet Union, Britain, and elsewhere, the bristles weight decreased by 3%. Why did some bristles just disappear when they stolen? The possible thieves of bristles in Tianjin were not humans, but water thieves and environments. As the company figured out, hog bristles can absorb and evaporate water in different weathers. Bristles production in summer or autumn are packed in winter or spring, so the weight of bristles will increase. Bristles in inland warehouses can be 2 to 3% lighter than those in coastal warehouses. Another factor was microbes. After collecting bristles, factories will pile them up or soak them in water for natural fermentation. The growing microbes would help eat out denders, skins, fat, and other residuals from bristles. The bristle itself was more resistant to bacterial decomposition. However, it's not easy to control the timing and amount of microbes fermentation. In 1965, Neijiang Bristle Cooperative was fined almost $8,000 for losing a huge amount of bristles. According to investigations, the cooperative soaked bristles in wastewater for too long. As a result, over 2,000 kilograms of bristles seriously decayed due to long-time exposure to fungus and bacteria. More often than thieves and smugglers, uncontrollable microbes were the main cause of the reduction of bristle production. Bristle processing could also endanger human wellness. According to agronomist Wu Xiying, it's dangerous for workers to touch bristles. Almost all bristle workers have skin disease on their hands, and the fiber of bristles easily gets harder in the air and harm workers' lungs. One solution to protect bristle workers, according to Sichuan's commercial department, was replacing human labor with machines. A bristle processing factory in Sichuan made bristle collecting machines to brush away dirt and aiming to protect workers from occupational disease. Pig skin. Although China raised many pigs, most places use cattle hides as leather and took pig skins as food. As the CCP took over China, bovines and draft animals were in great shortage and were legally banned from being killed. Pig skin became an ideal substitute because the annual slaughter of pigs for pork was massive. In 1958, the PRC's Ministry of Light Industry called for using pig skins to replace cattle for in leather production. In the 1970s, slogans such as skinning pigs to support socialist construction and world revolution were circulated across the country. And by late 1970s, China had contributed to around 600,000 tons of pig skin, which was about 1/3 of any world pig skin production. Here's a table made by a 1959 experiment team led by the Shanghai Bureau of Light Industry. The experiment tried to make pigskin soft enough and use a pair of clothes from West Germany as a production standard. Seeing great gaps between Chinese and West German pigskin samples, some experimenters proposed that West Germany could produce high quality leathers because their pigs were different grades with softer skin. Similarly, a food factory worker highlighted that Chinese pig breeds were so diverse that it was impossible to design a machine for skinning all Chinese pigs when looking at a sample machine from East Germany. It's interesting that East German machine met West German pig leather in China despite their Cold War separation marked by the Berlin Wall. Anyway, those arguments about the difficulty in skinning pigs with machines and softening pig skin were criticized in thought reforms for disregarding the importance of human efforts in liberating technologies. I will focus on the technological extent to softer pig skins. In 1950s to 60s, the Chinese leather factory used alkaline chemicals to remove pig hairs, making pig skins very tough and production process very toxic. According to data from a medical room of Chongqing leather factory, 28 workers died between 1969 and 1978, with 20 of them dying from cancer. The high percentage of cancer among leather workers were likely caused by drinking water that was polluted by leather production waste. And besides, leather workers usually have skin diseases due to corrosive chemicals and zoonotic diseases because of improper sanitization. So to find a better agent, leather factories in Shanghai integrated native and foreign approaches. In native traditions, the agents used for softening animal skins were bird droppings and rye husk and malt. And in 1953, experimenters at Shanghai Leather Company tried to use pancreatic enzymes as a baiting agent. As early as 1907, German chemist Otto Rohn has isolated pancreatic enzymes for baiting leather. But when it came to the Shanghai experiment on pig skins, pancreatic enzymes failed to soften those pig skins effectively. So we're into the late 1950s and 60s. The experimenters try out different combinations of agents on pig skins using pancreatic enzyme together with more traditional agents like mold. And since these agents had different effects on pH values, those experimenters referred to a handbook about the Czech leather industry to make different solutions. And in the 60s and 70s, the Chinese experiment teams further used microbes on pig skins by citing US uses of microbial enzymes on cattle pets. In 1968, Shanghai Xinxi Leather Factory succeeded in effectively removing pig hairs and softening pig skins with those enzymes. And in 1972, the PRC's Ministry of Light Industry declared that microbes would be better for dehairing and baiting than alkaline chemicals, because microbes are diverse, fast-growing, and conducive to revolutionary changes. Besides, workers doesn't have to inhale toxic gases and drafting fast.
I need you to conclude now, so we have time for a third speaker.
Okay. So I'll get into, and the most important thing for this new technology was that it will help to reduce environmental pollution, because the chemicals that originally used in leather factories was very polluting. It's polluting to the water and land. So, and they think the microbial enzyme could help to reduce the number of wastewater and turn it to fertilizer. And sometimes leather factories, some fishermen, and even in Quanzhou, for example, the fishermen and nearby residents often complain about the leather factory because the waste released from the factory cause a huge amount of, make the underground water undrinkable and even kill many water-borne creatures. So they tend to microbial as the alternative. Yeah.
Thank you. Very, very interesting.
One final quote I encountered at an archival document. like, because the sovereignty asked, when the sovereignty propagated policy of pigs to the masses, some peasants just asked, if 1 kilogram of pig products can help our country get so many grants, why are we paid only a few cents for a pig? I think that's very.
That was wonderful. Thank you. I think we have many provocative problems about pigs and people to think about for questions during the break. So thank you again. Our third presenter is joining us by Zoom. We'll set up in a moment. Susan will be on.
Yes,
All
can
right,
you
so
hear me?
We can hear you. Yes, this is great. So our third speaker is Susan Whyman, who'll be presenting on how Edmund Rack became a master of knowledge in 18th-century Bath. Thank you, Susan.
I'm going to share my screen.
Please do.
Can you see that?
I can see it on this screen, but.
Wait a minute, let me just make one adjustment
Yeah,
here.
there it is.
Beautiful.
Now we see it.
Okay, do you see the full screen now, and can you hear me and see me?
Yes, it's all good. Thank you.
Okay. So thank you for having me. I'm coming to you from New Jersey. I am a cultural historian with a PhD from Princeton University, and I'm very excited about using the history of knowledge as a framework. So excitement was in the air in the British spa town of Bath in March 1780. In a dark room outfitted with an electrifying machine, members of the Bath Philosophical Society gathered to discuss light and electricity. The minutes show the experiments were so absorbing, the meeting lasted 4 hours. The topic was proposed by William Herschel, the astronomer, who was soon to discover the planet Uranus. Edmund Rack, the Society's Quaker secretary and driving force, set up a committee to, quote, resolve problems in electricity, as pointed out personally by Dr. Priestley, end quote. Rack's reference was to the scientist Joseph Priestley, who was conducting experiments nearby. The participants found that, quote, diverse kinds of bodies being exposed to the sun's rays and instantly drawn into the dark room would retain their light. When Rack wrote on a sheet of paper and pressed it with a hot iron, its light appeared for a minute all on fire, and the writing was very legible. More substances were exposed to light and exactly minuted with a stopwatch: stalactites, live fish, mosses, sugar leaks, dried wood, garden roots, fossils, and minerals, end quote. Why, may we ask, was this society dedicated to learning founded in a spa town dedicated to pleasure? Why was its meeting led by a former shopkeeper? And why was he respected by well-known scientists? Rack had settled in Bath in 1775 at age 40, yet why he chose Bath is unknown, and his early life has been a mystery. My sources show he's born in Norfolk to humble Quaker parents, lacked formal schooling, and was apprenticed to a shopkeeper. Then he married his employer, a draper's widow, and settled in Great Barthfield, Essex. His love of learning amidst a supportive Quaker community led him to educate himself and write poetry and prose. We do know Rack's passion for knowledge governed every aspect of his life. He longed to improve society by circulating information to others. In our age, he claimed, we are favored with more excellent communications of knowledge and have access to sources of information from which the purest principles of science are drawn. When ill health struck, he refused to become depressed, for, quote, the treasures of true science and learning remain when every other enjoyment vanishes as a vapor. Rack's journal shows he founded his society to create and circulate a new type of local knowledge based on scientific experiments for the public good. Yet Roy Porter called Rack a, quote, marginal man, attempting to win cultural prestige through promoting science, a mere petty bourgeois in an aristocratic milieu who never won cultural authority, end quote. In contrast, I place Rack in the framework of the history of knowledge and see him as a cultural broker or go-between who lay at the intersection between scholarly and practical knowledge and strove to increase learning in his native and host locales, an example of Eduardo Grandi's normal exceptions, who allows us to knit macro and micro history together. This method has helped me discover that Rack's universe was far larger than the polite world of a spa, and his choice of Bath was ideal. The expanding city was the site of an enlightened print culture, interest in science and technology, experiments by professionals, and tied to global empires. And here we see two views of Bath, one before and one after he came to settle there. In Rack's time, it had 25,000 visitors and the means to develop scientific institutions. New sources reveal Rack's vast London networks in the 1760s, whose members taught him how to navigate the capital's print marketplace. One of them, Richard Crutwell, the new owner of the Bath Chronicle, would play a major role in Rack's life. Soon, hundreds of Rack's anonymous poems and essays appeared in London periodicals, like Crutwell's monthly Miscellany. Rack's Quaker London networks also linked him to Britain's colonies. He was often found in the Quaker corner of London's Carolina Coffee House with his little flock of, quote, merchants, printers, and booksellers who published poems in London's monthly ledger. Later, these friends sent books to Rack's societies and printed and distributed Rack's writings. As the group grew in wealth, they acquired international contacts and were prominent in the Quakers' liberal wing. By the 1780s, they were the most active members of the London Abolition Committee and a key source for its publications against the slave trade. These hidden ties explain Rack's anonymous essay on William Penn in 1779. It was appended to the second edition of Caspipina's Letters. That was a code name for American independence. Its author, Reverend Jacob Duché of Philadelphia, was a board member of Benjamin Franklin's Library Company. Duché ordered books for its shelves from Rack's Quaker friends in London. Rack's intimate ties with abolitionists also explain why he asked the former slave Ignatius Sancho for permission to print his letters to the East Indies and Philadelphia in a collection of letters of friendship. As a member of a global epistolary network, Rack saw himself as an early opponent of slavery who spread knowledge across the world. In 1769, when the death of Bath's master of ceremonies left a leadership gap, Rack saw the chance to start a new life using skills honed in Essex and then London. Thus, he recycled his anonymous verses into a book of published poems and swiftly moved to Bath. He arrived as a man of letters with London networks filled with authors, printers, preachers, abolitionists, future scientists, global traders, and ties to international societies. His goal was to use these contacts to become Bath's first master of knowledge. They included the Bath Chronicle's owner, Richard Crutwell, and his friend, the Quaker preacher, William Matthews. This trio would support each other's projects in life and serve as executors at their deaths. Once in Bath, Rack implemented a plan for agricultural improvement. Here I can tie into the other papers. It was a subject he had mastered when he was a shopkeeper in East Anglia. His articles calling for reform in the Bath Chronicle and Farmers Magazine were widely distributed by Richard Crutwell. In 1777, Rack founded the Bath and West Agricultural Society, which still exists today. As secretary, he was paid £50 a year, plus £30 to use his house for exhibits and books. Its members, the Agricultural Society, were a few aristocrats, a cluster of medical men, and a wide range of people interested in science. The society conducted scientific experiments on its own farm, offered prizes for reforms, and discussed Rack's chart of local plants according to Linnaeus's categories. To create regional statistics, Rack circulated questionnaires to leaders across 4 counties. In 1780, unlike other farming groups, Rack and Crutwell published the first of 14 volumes of the Society's transactions based on Rack's huge international correspondence. His friend, the agricultural innovator Arthur Young, praised it publicly to raise local support. Rack's aim was to, quote, show the superiority of the newly improved mode of farming from real facts and experiments, which would be of more essential service to the public than volumes of theory, end quote. Rack's essay on the origin of agriculture was a public announcement of his dominant position in the field and contained research reports from scores of international agricultural societies. In 1780, Count Khamhov, sent by Russia's empress to study British agriculture, visited Rack's collections. Later, he joined the society and sent publics and seeds from Russia. Rack and Khamhov fit a pattern of transnational go-betweens who bound their societies together. Rack's literary reputation also spread to America. His essays, reprinted in the American Herald, made him its most published author in the 1780s. In 1779, heady with success, Rack co-founded the Bath Philosophical Society. It is to be quite select, he wrote. We admit none but men of known abilities and learning in the different branches of science. As members, they shared an ardor for natural philosophy and scientific experiments. Rack's Quaker heritage can be seen in the Society's mission, quote, to discover the truth and to improve the mind by reciprocal communication of knowledge, end quote. Unlike similar groups, it annually published its minutes, officers, and rules, which gave it a clearly defined institutional identity. As secretary, Rack again was paid £50 a year. When the Society's library and instruments were installed in his home, he was literally at the center of Bath's cultural networks. My biographies of the 27 founding members of the Philosophical Society show unknown interactions with other known scientists and institutions. James Collins and William Watson, for example, undertook industrial espionage of a rival steam agent near Bath on behalf of Matthew Boulton and James Watt. By the 1780s, Rack was a respected author. His 20 publications covered subjects from turnips to personal salvation. His mentor's letters addressed to youth sold 3,000 copies in 4 editions by 1785. Rack's essays, letters, and poem, published in 1781, had several hundred subscribers. Yet his role as a cultural translator of local knowledge practices is best seen in Rack's survey of Somerset, which he made during the 1780s for Joseph Collinson's County History of Somerset. Reverend Collinson attended Oxford but knew little about publishing. He was led by Rack, who provided him with on-site parish data gleaned from 5 years of arduous travel on horseback. Rack chose the production team using local and London networks, marketed the book, and obtained nearly 800 subscribers. Rack based his survey on what he deemed were scientific methods. He sent questionnaires to landholders and interviewed people of all ranks. Then he recorded data in a set order of subject headings onto portable paper slips. Perhaps he knew that Linnaeus used paper slips for his classification scheme, for Rack became a member of London's Natural History Society, the forerunner of the Linnaean Society. In writing history, Rack wrote Collinson, "We wish not to be content with mediocrity when excellence can be attained," end quote. Rack paid a high price for excellence and died worn out by travel before Collinson's County History was published in 1791. Sadly, Collinson omitted most of Rack's information in his scholarly tome. He used antiquarian sources, not Rack's first-hand data, which revealed the current state of Somerset. As you see on this slide, Rack's original survey was published at last, but not till 2020. Happily, his paper slips still survive, as shown on this image. Collinson had a different view of what constituted local knowledge and who had the right to spread it. Though he needed Rack's contacts and skills, he rejected Rack's learning. Yet scientists like Priestley knew Rack was creating an innovative scientific community. Their respect for his leadership sends a signal that though we may find an unschooled Quaker an odd master of knowledge, they did not. And though we may find Bath an unlikely place for learning, they viewed it as an ideal time and place in which to implement Rack's vision. Rack's Quaker background, his outsider status, and Bath's political crisis helped him recognize the spa's future potential. Thus, he was able to see Bath anew from fresh angles. We, too, can reassess our well-known frameworks that focus solely on Bath's pleasure and politeness. In fact, members for Rack societies were waiting to join. Medical men interested in experiments, geologists in search of new theories, naturalists collecting flora, and instrument makers keen to loan telescopes. As Porter later admitted, quote, "The town which drew the largest audiences for science lectures was not Birmingham or Manchester, but Bath. The spa was a perfect location for social integration through science. No longer the exclusive property of elites, knowledge was shared by people of varied ranks, educations, and religion." Rack's success reveals this shift. So does the admission to Bath's Philosophical Society
We have
by,
about 3 minutes left, Susan,
by
just-
Mr. Parsons. Is there a problem? Can you hear me?
I can hear you. I'm just giving you a warning. We have about 3 minutes left in our session.
A Baptist stonecutter. My work thus challenges the trickle-down theory of knowledge to social hierarchies. Peter Burke cautions us to avoid assumptions about eventual democratization of knowledge, and his story uncovers a tug of war for forces both narrowing and creative access. Rack's presence helps us answer James Secor's seminal questions. How and why does knowledge circulate? How does it become the exclusive property of an individual and the understanding of wider groups of people? Like Secord, Rack saw knowledge as a form of communication to be created locally and then circulated for the public good. He was able to knit men together as a culture broker in every stage of his life. To conclude, this paper rejects claims that the Bath's Philosophical Society was based merely on politeness. Herschel's discovery of Uranus was reported to the Bath Society before it was read in London. At least 11 of Bath's members were elected to London's Royal Society. Before the Manchester and Newcastle societies even met, Rack had discussed electricity with Herschel and Priestley. His engagement with these giants allows us to explore the history of knowledge in both local micro and macro contexts. He joins the global phenomenon of entrepreneurial go-betweens who became masters of knowledge over time and space. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. That was very interesting. That idea of why settle for mediocrity when we can attain excellence reminds me of many discussions in committee meetings that I have sat in. So thank you for the bringing the eloquence of the past back to life for us. Are there questions from the room, please?
Yes, I have a very interesting, thank you. Just out of curiosity, I just wonder at the time if any female member was involved in the society or any evidence for like that kind of knowledge to be circulating among females.
We're able to hear the question, the role of women in the society or the circulation of knowledge.
Yes, there were no women in Bath's particular society, but in my larger work, I talk about the place of women both in Bath and in scientific societies. You may know that Herschel, who would become so famous as an astronomer and lived in Bath and was a good friend of Rack's, his sister Caroline would become a famous scientist. And Bath, in a way, although it was this pleasureful spa, though I'm trying to change that complexion, was a haven for women. And so there were a lot of scientific lectures that were attended by women, and women were members of other societies. So thank you for pointing that out, because they did play an important role in 18th century science.
All right, let's thank Susan and all of our panelists in our penultimate session. We have our last break and then our very final session coming up after this. So thank you, everyone.